Hey, MegaJeff here again. Time for the final little connection, I think, with my trip. Recently, I've been doing videos about the best finds, all the things I found when I was in Richmond. And that was connected to a business trip in DC. On the way back, I jumped out from a train in Richmond, met my wife. We spent the weekend there. It was our anniversary. So we kind of got away. We hit a bunch of record stores in Richmond. So I'm backtracking a little bit because while I was in DC, I didn't hit any record stores. DC, I didn't have transportation. I was just at a conference. But I did have friends. So let me jump back. Real brief story. 1987, there was a band called Second Chance. They had some demos out. This was back in the days of tape trading and buying tapes from bands who were up and coming. And I loved this band, Second Chance. They had 2 cassettes out. Great stuff. And so in 1987, I went to Cornerstone, big Christian music festival, and happened to run into the guitar player, one of the main guys behind the band Second Chance, and we hung out most of that weekend. Over the years, we've stayed in contact through various social media platforms. He lives in DC, just up the road, but we've never actually gotten together. We've chatted and stuff online. He's a drummer. Also, I'm a drummer, so we've talked about that. And so hey, Robby, I'm coming to DC. We finally decide, it's literally like 30 minutes from his house, 20, 30 minutes. He comes over to the hotel. He said, look, I got some records I'm going to dump on you anyway because I don't want to carry these around anymore. He's not much into vinyl anymore. And so he basically brought me a box, and the majority of stuff that he had, I have. But he's like, I don't want to take any of this stuff home. So I went ahead and just bought it all from him. And so I thought I'll just move it on. So I want to briefly show, I picked up a box of like 60 plus albums. Again, most of the stuff, all but a few, I already had. So got some people interested. I'm going to sell off the rest of it, just basically make my money back to moving on to new homes. It's great stuff in great condition. So let's take a look at it. Second Chance went on to they renamed themselves Armageddon. All of those demo tracks ended up on this album. The album came out in 89. This is a vinyl reissue of 2019. Still one of my favorite albums. Love this band, love the sound. And then they got back together, I forget the exact year, and then I am not seeing a date on here immediately, but a handful of years ago, in the past 10, 15 years, they changed the name to Armageddon USA because there's so many Armageddons. And they put out a new album. And he did bring me this. It's all autographed by the band. It's in silver, kind of hard to see there, but I had the CD already, but I did not have an autograph version. So he brought me that, tossed that in for me. And so, yeah, so great stuff. So, yeah, so it was great to finally, after almost 40 years, meet back up with him and hang with him. He brought this box of records. I flipped through it, and I'm like, yeah, I have most all this, but, I'll find a home for it. But let me run through it. I'm just going to fly through this stuff. If you know, you know. For those of you who are not into Christian rock, hard rock metal of the 80s, maybe it'll be new to you, but definitely some great stuff. Starting off with Stryken, first Stryken single. It's 2 songs on both sides. Great stuff from Texas band. They went on to do an album. Great stuff. They are back together now, though musically the stuff I'm hearing online is nothing like this, but great stuff, so. Okay, Leviticus, I Shall Conquer. This is the U.S. cover edition, and I mention that because, there is a Swedish edition which has a different cover that came out like the year before. So they're a Swedish band. They release an album, then they get it over in America, and they release it a year later. So this is their first one. This is actually when I discovered them. This was one of the first bands I discovered after Stryper was Leviticus. So an extra copy there, and I've already got an OG of that one too. And I mentioned the difference in cover because that'll come up later. Philadelphia, Tell the Truth, great band from down south. This has been reissued. So that's the first Philadelphia, and this was the second one. Again, also in the shrink but open. Both of these have been reissued in recent years on vinyl. Rock of Offense by First Strike. Great one-off band. They did do like a 4-song or so cassette after this. But anyway, this is just a great one. Produced by Mike Rowe of the 77s. Just a good hard rocking outfit from back in the day in the mid 80s. Messiah Prophet, Master of the Metal. Excellent album. One of their key albums. Their second album. This was on Pure Metal Records. Their first album was Rock the Flock. great condition here. This is on Miranda Records, their first album that came before that and everything before they got signed to that. Bride Show No Mercy. I found a copy of this, an OG copy of this in a Second and Charles, a couple years ago I showed. Turns out that the lyric sheets, this one's pink, the one I had was blue. I guess they alternated colors, but great album. Just have there's an OG copy of that. East Coast Metal, one of those compilations. Regency Records did a lot of these back in the day, and the fun thing about this one is it's got Second Chance on it. So this is before the band renamed themselves Armageddon. They were called Second Chance, and this is one of the songs from the demo that did make it on the album. So that's great stuff there. Saint Warriors of the Sun. This is the first album. This is on the same label as the Rock the Flock by Messiah Prophet. So one of the early albums I picked up back in the days when I started listening to Christian metal. I went out and got Leviticus and Saint and Messiah Prophet because they were all in local stores. Great album. This is the original. This is their first album, but when they got reissued on that label. And again, I'll bring that up again in a minute. The second Bloodgood album, 1987. Robby and I saw these guys at Cornerstone because they were at Cornerstone 87. But this was one of the metal bands that was there. Excellent album. First album from 1986. Shrink Wrap is kind of tearing up there of Bloodgood. Another great album back in the day. The first Barren Cross album. Rock for the King. I believe they were Cornerstone 86, which I missed, but did get to see them this recently in Ohio. So that was great for the first time. Atomic Arena is the second album by them. They were on Enigma Records, similar to Stryper, so they had some videos and stuff on MTV back in the day. Maybe you remember for Imaginary Music and stuff. So another great band there. Then, of course, you got to have some Stryper in there, and God We Trust. Just one of their pivotal 80s albums. To Hell with the Devil with the Angel cover that was sort of banned by some stores because it looked too weird, and so there's a black version too. Great stuff there, just typical stuff there. The EP remixed and remastered and a couple songs added, and most people don't prefer the way that this sounds, and I'm one of them. We all prefer the original release. This is the original release on Enigma, and this is the miscropped or wrongly cropped album. The hand is too small. The letters are, each one of the missiles has letter of the band's initials, and this one's cropped off. So this album was originally released, or EP, was originally released with the miscropping, and it was released on black and yellow vinyl. This is the yellow vinyl edition. And then within that same year, I believe they reissued this, proper cropping, shrunk it down, as you can see, everything better, just on black. I do have copies of all three of those variants. Now I have a second one there of the yellow. One of their singles, Reason for the Season, from the second Soldiers Under Command album. Christmas song for this one, but it came out right before Soldiers Under Command. It was kind of an in-between. And then a single from Soldiers Reach Out that came out around the time. I remember buying all these while we were waiting for that new album. Follower Into the Sun. This is cool. I already have this. This was recently reissued on CD, remastered. And Brian, the guitar player, went on to be in White Heart for a bit. Then we move into a splurge of Daniel Band, Rock On, their first album, Canadian rock band. Their first original album, Straight Ahead. The second album, Run from the Darkness. This is about the time I discovered them. Just great hard rocking album. Probably one of their heaviest albums, Rise Up. Great stuff. Also, love Daniel Band back in the day. Another early band that I discovered when I first started listening to Christian music was Barnabas, Approaching Light Speed. Feel the Fire. I remember buying both of these two albums back in the day. And then later, they came out with Little Foxes. And this is around the time frame where I actually met and went over to the singer and the bass player's house and had pizza and watched Amadeus. But anyway, this is a cool one, Anthem. This is not one you see as often. It was on Toonsmith Records, Canadian label that put out a lot of Christian rock back in the day. And this is one of the early bands, female-fronted bands. They only really did this one album, though there is a Cutting Through Part 2, which was kind of remixed and tweaked a little bit. That came out on CD, I believe. But Toonsmith albums, I love Toonsmith albums. They're not as not as easy to find, but they're great stuff because it's just some of the classic stuff. I do have a copy of this though, but that was in most of our collections back in the day. This one I didn't put in my album section to keep, but maybe I should. And that's just the best of res. I don't think I have this in my OG's res collection, but great stuff. Then we move into a little poppier, a little lighter rock stuff. Kerry Livgren, formerly of Kansas. This is his first solo album. It's got guest appearances. Ronnie James Dio sings on here. It's got Mylon Lefevre. It's got all kinds of different people, kind of him and friends doing an album. Great album. Little cover damage there. It is a gold stamp promo, but it's also a white label promo, I believe. So there is a possibility I may keep this one in exchange for the non-promo edition that I've got. Need to compare with that. Second album, Timeline. This is where he started changing into the AD moniker and going with the band name AD. Art of the State, one of my favorite AD albums. This one's got, the cover's kind of beat up. I don't know what the deal is here. It's all beat up, but the album is in excellent condition. But have no fear, he has one that's still in the shrink. So, you know, excellent condition there too. Similarly, Petra beat the System. I think later, there's no title or anything on here. Later they added a title on there. But he has a second one in shrink with the hype sticker that's got the title on it. So I believe they're I think when I logged them, they're the same pressing. I only have two Darrel Mansfield albums in my collection, and he happens to have the same too. So we've got Darrel Mansfield here, still in the shrink, great condition, and then Revelation. This is the one that's got Paul Gilbert does a guest guitar solo on this album. So great stuff. And then we move into some Daniel Amos, just a classic Horrendous disc, classic, great stuff. They're just notorious for being popular in the late 70s and early 80s. Doppelgänger, and these are all ones that I've already got, so, you know, just some great stuff by them. And then he also has Alarma, which is probably one of their more popular ones. It seems like most people knew this and Horrendous disc the most back in the day. And then a couple of Randy Stonehills, The Sky Is Fallen, and The Wild Frontier, which is one I found recently at a thrift store when I found that whole bunch of CCM stuff. And then there's just a compilation here, the Real Rock Remembered. I believe I bought this a while back because I think the track by Jerusalem is a non-album track. There's something about it. It's got Daniel Bandagomo and Key and some other bands on there. So comps are just kind of fun like that. So those are the ones that he had that were duplicates, things I didn't need. Here's the ones that I am keeping. There's only a handful of these. Some of them, and a couple of them are really key grails for me. Times In by Saint, not so much. I had a copy of this OG. It was an import version. When it got remastered and reissued, I think I sold that because I no longer have that. This is an OG copy of the American pure metal version. The interesting thing about this, which I learned as I was logging it, is there's a couple different versions out there. Island Prisoner and In the Night. Island Prisoner is not the first track, so this is a misprint. And so this cover is a misprint edition. There is another cover that came out later that has In the Night first and Island Prisoner second, which is the proper way that they appear on the record. The record inner circle label has them this way, Island Prisoner and In the Night. Even when they corrected it on the cover, the labels still had them switched. So kind of an interesting thing. I discovered that there's versions out there that are backwards like that. Contagious, Free Indeed. I have the first Contagious album. They're just a California band that put out 2 albums on a real small label, and this is the only one I didn't have. You can see it's still in the shrink with the price. So I'm keeping that because that finishes my collection. Going back to the Leviticus title, this is The Strongest Power, the second Leviticus album, which I do own, the US version, different cover. This is the Swedish version with the Swedish cover, and I say Swedish version, it's still sung in English, but and it's a gatefold. So I'll probably keep that because it is a different variant, you know, of the album, which I love. Same here, Setting Fire to the Earth. There's nothing different about this album except this version is the Swedish release on Royal Music. I have the American release on Pure Metal. I have the reissue that came out a couple years ago. So now I have 3 copies. I really need to struggle with the idea. Am I going to keep multiple variants just because they're different countries? I don't know. And if I end up saying no, then I can move on, get rid of some of these and keep one only. This is kind of neat. Holy Right Stand is one, you know, a custom type release back in the day. The album itself has a cult following, but the album itself is kind of rough and raw, and some people love it, some people hate it. I loved it back in the day. Keith Miles, a singer here, he's the guy that actually did the logo for my. He did art, graphic design on the side, and he's the one that did the logo for my Pendragon magazine back in the day. So there's a connection there. Um, these two guys were at the Ohio concert I went to a weekend or 2 weeks ago, as part of Iron Wrath. I don't think the other guys came over. I think when it started, Iron Wrath used to be these four guys, and they put out a tape back in the late 80's, early 90's, but now I think it's just these two guys. But got to meet and talk to Chris a little bit, spent some time talking to Sean. Yeah, some fun times there. Oh, I've got this album already. The reason that I'm probably going to keep this is because it turns out I have a black edition and this is a white. There were two variants. He turned out to have the white one. I thought, oh, well, I guess maybe I'll keep that. Compilation Swedish metal. The only thing on here, I don't know anything about the bands except Motherload. I have the first Motherload album, which is one of my favorite albums. Swedish, just melodic band, and the songs are represented on here. This is part of that first album time frame. I mentioned a lot of the Daniel Amos. I kept the Vox Humana. It's one of the only ones of that particular selection that I did not have on vinyl. So there, I grabbed that one out of there to keep. This was kind of cool. Rob Cassels band. I had this back in the day. There's like three main Rob Cassel albums from this time frame. There's Pastoral Evening, which is his first earlier album, and then there was Off the Wall, and before that was Kamikaze Christian. I had Kamikaze Christian and Off the Wall back in the day, so this was cool to have again for the first time. I have them all on CD because they were reissued and remastered and all that. A band I'm not familiar with, but I figure I'd check out before I decide whether I'm going to move on. I've heard the name Blue Trapeze. Don't know anything about it, so I held that to the side to at least give it a spin. Randy Stonehill and Amy Grant, didn't know that this existed. Figure I'll check that out and decide whether I want to keep that, maybe move that along. And then Dave Perkins. I know who Dave Perkins is. I've got stuff with him playing on it. Never heard his solo albums or anything. Figure I'd check that one out before I decided if I wanted to move on. And then the two that were really pivotal that I really thought were really cool to have is he had a copy of State of Control, Barren Cross. This was the only one I didn't have an OG copy of because it tended to be hard to find. It tended to be sometimes expensive. So he had an OG copy of the U.S. pressing. And so I was like, that's cool. Even though it has recently been reissued, remastered, and put out on vinyl. So I do have a copy. Now I have an OG, which completes the OG copies, except for the live album. But I have all the studio albums. And the grail of all finds, and again, it's just because I've wanted this, and that's the original Rotten Records release of Saints' Words of the Sun. It's out there. It can be costly. I've seen it sell for $100+, and so I've just never. I'm not a collector in the sense that I want to spend a lot of money on it, but it would have been cool to have. And so the music is no different from the one that later came out on Miranda Records. It's just a novelty of saying, hey, I've got a copy of the one that Saint released on, I don't know, Rotten Records, I think might have been their own label. Maybe it's a very small label. But it was always one of those things that was like, that'd be really cool to have, but I'm not going to pay that much money for it. And so he had a copy, and I'm like thrilled that I could get it for a decent price. And so, yeah, this was the greatest part because I've wanted this for so many years. So this was the greatest find. So, and then the other thing that he gave me, he just threw these in, and is some cassettes. I had all these back in the day. I've sold them over the years, but they're great stuff. So Tempest Annihilation of the Wicked. This, I actually reached out to the main guy behind this, amazing bass player, early thrash stuff. And I contacted him, found him on Facebook. He goes by a slightly different name. He does DJ work and stuff. But tried to talk to him to do an interview just to maybe discuss why this kind of, people want this to be reissued. It'd be great to have. It's mainly four tracks with 3 bass solos on the second side. So, but that's cool to have. I had that before. Valor Masquerade. This has been reissued on CD and vinyl in recent years. This is their early cassette demo type thing. Same with Golgotha Prisoner. Great stuff back in the day. This has seen the light of day on CD. I don't think there's ever been anything on vinyl. Holy Danger One Way. Holy Danger, great stuff. I bounced this over to CD years ago myself. It's an interesting album. This is kind of where Tourniquet bounced out of. A couple of the guys in this band are later in Tourniquet, the singer and the guitar player. Kind of a fun, quirky early metal release. Great stuff that has never been reissued. And then the Vengeance demo, which this has been reissued, put on vinyl, put on CD, reissued all the time, but it's just a classic to have. So he kind of threw those in. So that's thrilling. But that's it for this one. Just a bunch of fun stuff, a lot of stuff from back in the early to mid 80s in the Christian market with the hard rock and stuff at that time. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got something out of that. I am enjoying having this, and I will move this on to a new home so I don't have so many duplicates. And until then, I'll see you later. Rock on and rock hard.